Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your interest in India Energy Transition Dialogues, and welcome to the seventh in this series of webinars. And as many of you have already participated in this series, and we have been discussing about various pathways to India's 450 gigawatt RE target, and we have discussed around distributed RE, solar feeders, discom specific approach, data gap, and all those issues. And today we have WRI and Stella panel to discuss the new technologies, developments, and capacity addition, strategic policy measures, policy interventions required to accelerate India's clean energy target and clean energy trajectory. So in India, mm, the four technologies which has been prioritized are wind, solar, various storage technologies, and more recently hydrogen has been a policy priority as well. So with this panel, we are going to discuss and explore what are the technology options, challenges, opportunities, and business models around these technologies. And we have a panel with expertise on each of these technologies. And to start with, we'll start with a brief presentation by Kajol, who is Manager of Energy Program at WRI India. She will introduce the topic and set the context. Then we have a panel including Gayatri Prakash, who is Associate Program Officer at IRENA. We also have Netra Walwalakar, Director Strategic Partnerships, India Energy Storage Alliance. We have Will Hull, who is Head of Building and Industry for COP26 at Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy at in United Kingdom. We have Dr. Rajesh Katyal, who is Deputy Director General of National Institute of Wind Energy. And we also have Sandhya Sundaragavan, who is Lead Energy Transitions at WRI India. So without much delay, I'll request Kajal to start with the presentation, and then we get into the discussion. Kajal, over.
Thanks, Ashwini. I'll share my screen. Please confirm if you can see that. I hope it's visible. Thanks. So, to begin with, thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar where we are planning to discuss on the new technologies and how they can help us in achieving our target for 450 gigawatt by 2030. So clean energy technologies has recently emerged as a significant way to ensure a cleaner and efficient transition, not just in India, but globally. So through this presentation, I would like to emphasize on the role of these new technologies for the national energy and the climate targets, how the states can play a role at adoption of these new technologies and the status of these new technologies currently in India, and who could be the key stakeholders and how can we take this forward. I begin with a quick background on India's renewable energy mix. We are the third largest electricity consumer in the world, and currently 38% of our consumption is met through the renewable sources. And against the target for 450 gigawatt, we are still short of 314 gigawatt. And in 2018, Central Electricity Authority (CEA) has set a target of producing 57% of total electricity from the renewable sources by 2027. And with our target, we need to add every year approximately 32 gigawatts of renewable energy. And if we include, this is what if we include the nuclear and hydro, but if we exclude that, it will be slightly even more. So a study conducted by CEA has indicated that the electricity demand is expected to rise from 400 gigawatts to 900 gigawatts, which is approximately 340 gigawatts by 2030 from today's current consumption. And it is speculated that the factors like the growth in the income per capita, the urbanization, and the overall rise in the economic activities will lead into much higher demands. So, after looking at India's electricity demand, what does it mean for the state? How will the state be playing a role in that for the adoption and the energy demand and everything? Uh, so we will be looking particularly for Tamil Nadu in my in current study, because we have been closely and deeply working in the state, Tamil Nadu state, for their sustainable energy transition, and we looked at the state challenges and how this can be scaled to the other states as well. So Tamil Nadu, is a after Karnataka, Tamil Nadu has a second highest installed capacity for renewables, that accounts for nearly 45% of the total energy mix. And Tamil Nadu has the highest capacity of installed wind due to its prime location, favorable policies, and early adoption, which happened during the times of 90s. And in the recent time, the state consumption has also increased to almost double folds. And the overall per capita consumption is around 1467 kilowatt. This is for the figures of 1819. As I mentioned, the total installed capacity for Tamil Nadu is the highest, which is around 9.3 gigawatt. And this largely happened, the turbine installed in the early 90s were mostly of the unit of the capacity less than 1 megawatt. Uh, so looking from that point, like when the capacity was much lesser than 1 megawatt in this era, and and now with the evolution of the technologies, when you can see like a highest recently being announced turbine size was around 10 megawatts. So there is a huge potential for repowering and adoption of a large size wind turbine. In addition, with the long coastlines running around Tamil Nadu, offshore is the another potential technology. So in total, with onshore plus the about like 68 gigawatt of underlying wind potential lying in Tamil Nadu, out of which, as we see, only 9.3 gigawatt has been installed. Similarly, for the solar installation as well, currently 4.3 gigawatt is the installed current installed capacity, while there is a total potential of 279 gigawatts, which is around 2% of the overall available potential. So such high potential gives us space to look at the second and the third generation technologies. Considerably, there has been advances which made into the technologies and the solution that helps integrate the solar PV into the grid. These technology includes the output and the weather forecastings as well, and operational monitoring and the closed loop control for the large PV power stations have been realized. And the another sector for the solar energy to look where the decarbonization can help in the industry, especially when we look at our small scale industries, could be the solar thermal. Uh, the another segment which is being explored in Tamil Nadu is the biomass energy. In India, if we look at the total bioenergy capacity is around 10 gigawatt, and out of that, zero point 0.9 gigawatt is being installed in Tamil Nadu. And in the recent times, some new installations were being planned by the state for the investment of around 21,000 CR. So there is a very limited study which goes deeper into the assessing the overall biomass energy potential, because of its being a very unorganized and a challenging sector, although it's a very essential when we look at from the air pollution point of view as well. So there is a need to look at much more deeply into the biomass energy studies. The implementing the energy storage system is seen as a solution which offer a stability and balance to the grid, with especially with the large share of variable renewable energy, the VRE sources that are planned. As we see for the wind, there is about 68 gigawatt of underlying potential and 279 gigawatt of solar energy potential. The energy storage definitely is we need to look at, because we need a stability and we need to look for a long-term solution for this. Currently, there are no large-scale chemical-based energy storage technology in installations that has happened in Tamil Nadu. Although recently a tender for commissioning of a 1 megawatt solar plant with the associated battery storage was issued. With all these technologies, some of the other new technologies and fuel to keep an eye, we understand is definitely green hydrogen, solar thermal, and the other large energy storage systems, especially the gravity storage or the wind train, where the duration for the storage is much more longer when compared with the battery storage solutions. And we do understand the barriers to these adoption for these new technology can range from, the economic barriers, where the presence of the where there is a constraint for the where there are financial constraints with the developer as well as for the implementation for the adopters, and the presence of the supply chain as we are looking at these new technologies, and the complete infrastructure that is required is not currently present. So most of these high efficient technologies are either in like early stages of research and lack of maturity. And there is a need for an effective industry academia collaboration to push the overall research into the market. So the lack of knowledge about these new evolving technologies has led to where we are not being able to explore and still going back to the conventional or the traditional technologies. The another aspect is to look at the young forces in the countries where, as the technology is evolving and is evolving quite fast, has the skill development be also happening in the same pace, or is it still needs to be sharpened enough to catch up on with the new specific technologies? The major barrier, which is very important to look at, is the policy. There are inconsistency between the policy framework and the existing subsidies. And some of these technologies, which has not yet come into the market, still needs the better business models and the subsidies to address for the complete deployment. The required support from the government in terms of the regulation and the grant is something that we need to definitely push for more. And that is also quite visible, the number of patents that goes out from India pertaining to particularly for the new technologies. We looked at different new technologies in terms of their technology readiness level. And just to understand and classify these technologies offers a consistent tracking of its evolution and maturity. So the TRL is a 9-stage level distribution of the different categorization of the different technologies, where the TRL 1, 2, 3 is categorized as in the research stage, where the which lies for basically for the basic principles that has been observed to the proof of concept, and the TRL 4 to 6 is classified as for the development of the technology, which has gone out from the laboratory to be demonstrated in the environment. And for the TRL 7 to 9 is being categorized under the deployment, where the prototype is being tested in the specified environment, but looking for more commercialization and actual system that has been proven in the operational environment. So if you look at like new solar PV technology with different kind of a second generation to third generation, the technology has been validated, while some of these technologies has already been proven into the demonstrated sites and are looking for the commercialization. The overall potential for the market is quite high, as we already see, like in case of Tamil Nadu, the overall potential is quite high. And if we look at the overall India's solar potential, that also lies quite high in that sense. The market readiness stages are also that, as we have already seen, they have already been proven and they have been tested. They are looking for going for the deployment at the large scale. Although as the market will grow, we understand the supply chain and the larger forecasted study, which deepens into the future potential for other states also will go in a hand-to-hand way. The another is the wind repowering, especially for Tamil Nadu, which makes sense because there has been an early adoption for wind, and now with the underlying potential, there is already been proven, because onshore wind is something which has already been proven in many countries, and till 2 megawatt and around that has already been tested in India. But if we want to go much more higher, we need a much more stronger supply chain, and the market potential is there. But we see that because with the overall growth and the acceptance from the IPPs, that there is the market level and the market readiness is still in a medium level. And for the funding part, there has been a lot of work and the policy discussion going on, but still the overall pick for the repowering has not been taken place. The another is looking at the wind offshore. The wind offshore is technologically being um, tested into the labs, and there are discussions going on in Tamil Nadu and Gujarat. There were discussions for testing the pilot for a 1 megawatt. In Dhanushkodi, there were discussions for the demonstration and test beds to be developed to see the overall viability for the offshore wind in India, and especially for Tamil Nadu. And there has been a lot of studies being done in this piece to understand the overall market potential, and if we have the overall supply chain, what are the forecasted studies, what would be the challenges and the barriers. So Forewind has been working quite closely on the offshore wind in India. Green hydrogen is something which is very nascent, and we're still having a discussion. So there are initial studies have been started to work in India. There are potential identification that are going on, but when we look deeply into for a state specific studies, we still don't know how much potential lies for a particular state and how much is there for the particular sector. So the overall green hydrogen is still something that we need to manage. I understood, Ashwini, we need to like rush out. Um, so under the another is the energy storage batteries. We already having this discussions quite at the later stages where the technology is already being developed and tested and looking for the deployment. There is already a good scope and for the market to get into the adoption of it. And we have recently seen there has been a lot of startups that have come and were trying to develop the infrastructure and supporting structure in India. Similarly, for the energy storage, the discussion has been very low, although it's to a level being proven to for the market readiness, but still we are not has seen much large scale adoption of energy storage for the thermal. The another important technology that will be a very futuristic technology, and we need to start working on this, is a digitalization. The big data and the IoT, the blockchain is something that we need to start, and we need to start now working on this, because the data is definitely a challenge when we even do any sort of like research, and we want to have a better the overall readiness for these technologies and the grid integration. We definitely need to understand the overall supporting system that would be required for it. The hybrid technology, we basically classify under the solar and wind and solar and technologies which can be supported to and complementary to each other. There are already a lot of discussions going around for the hybrid technologies as well. And for the industrial decarbonization, the green hydrogen that I touched based on is another technology that we need to look at, apart from electrification of the some of the industrial utilities. The another important thing when we look at the new technologies is the role of different stakeholders. So based on the TRL level, at each stage of the technology development, the associated stakeholder has a set of responsibilities from the execution to the deployment, and an ecosystem that has to be created for this kind for different kind of stakeholder may vary from the technology to technology, and also for the sector that we are looking at it, whether it's a commercial, industrial, or a transport. The functional role and the classes of these different stakeholder changes over the evolution of the technology. So if we are looking at from the basic research to the applied research, definitely the role of government and the academia together plays a larger role, along with the understanding for the industries, what is the requirement and how do we need to proceed further. And as the technology progresses, the businesses and the private sector participation can be sought for the acceleration of the commercialization of these technologies. The industries, government, and the private sector must support the innovation to evolve from the market push to the market pull. I will not go much deep into each of these things, but in crux of that, the overall thing is the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, because we are looking at the clean energy technologies, the MNRE, and the state development agencies, which in our case is Tamil Nadu Energy Development Agencies, plays a central role, while other academia institute and the think tanks and the utilities and the industries plays as a supporting role when we want to look at the adoption of these new technologies. So I've just listed out like for each technology who could be the key stakeholders and who would play a major role and the secondary role. So when I leave it at these three open questions, when we are looking and brainstorming for these new technologies, what the state government needs to ask and how they can lead further for the adoption of these new technologies. So the how can the state can play a role in accelerating and scaling of these new technologies? Should there be new policies and encouraging policies? How they can bring in more startups into the market when they are looking at the newer technologies for the deployment? We need new people to be working on them, and how just not looking at one technologies, but also looking at how this can be complementary and alternatives can support each other. And the another aspect is also look at like in a longer run whether this technology is only a bridge between the final decarbonization pathway or is it the final stage that we have need to reach. The another very important piece is to look at like how we can decentralize the renewable option, and how this can be a potential, because sometimes we miss on to doing the more detailed potential studies when we are looking at a small scale renewable energy sources. So it is very important to see how in the cases like if we want to even look at the green hydrogen generation, can that also be associated with the DRE? And apart from just looking from the livelihood and the energy access point of view. The another very important question to ask here is about the financing and the business model. From the we have these specific markets at the national level, but when we come into the implementation at the subnational level, how the percolation of the funds can go from the center to the state, or from the state if there can be a separate funding or the grants that can come out for these new technologies specifically, looking at the cleaner and a newer innovative technologies. And when we look at like different business model, what percentage of role should the government be having in the initial stages, and how what could be the exit plans for the government for the deployment of these technologies? What share of these investments should be coming? So I leave at these three questions to Ashwini to take forward with the panel discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, Kajal. That's very useful context, and thanks for outlining readiness of various clean energy technologies and highlighting the role of states. And in fact, someone from audience asked why exclude hydro and RE from the clean energy target. In fact, the Minister of Power has recently clarified that the 450 gigawatt target is for new renewable energy sources, which includes all the technologies Kajal pointed out, not large hydro and nuclear. So in fact, as we are running out of time, India has to add at least 40 gigawatt capacity a year, I would say. So, and the key in meeting this target of 450 gigawatt would be how much, to what extent states adopt this target, and how they proceed. So that would be crucial. Kajol, you want to say something? You
No,
had.
I'm good. I'll just go mute.
Okay, so now I'll request our panelists to provide a brief reflection on what Kajal presented, and then in the next part we'll get into more of a conversational format. So I request the panelists to be concise, stick to 3 to 5 minute kind of initial remarks on Kajal's presentation. Let me request Gayatri to go first. Gayatri, over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Thanks a lot, Kajal. I think that was very insightful to know the current status and what the targets really mean in terms of different states. And so just to reflect on what the states can do in terms of the support and also in terms of the technologies that needs to be prioritized. And I think you already mentioned that some of the states like Tamil Nadu has a huge potential for wind. And I think that's very crucial in order to tap in the required potential of wind in those states, because it plays a major role in achieving those targets that have been set for 2030. So, however, there are some challenges, and also in terms of process planning, I think there are a lot of struggles that the technology is facing. So the first and foremost objective for policymakers is to mitigate those barriers and to kind of promote the accelerated deployment of those technologies in those states by properly planning a big projects, like for instance like solar parks in Rajasthan, or a big offshore and onshore wind projects that have to be planned in the south. So I think first removing the barriers and promoting large scale projects plays a key role. And that's the straightforward recommendation, I would say. And also, I think it's important that these states are also facing huge system losses, and it's important also to focus on the infrastructure. So as and when we increase the renewable penetration in some of the states, we also need to think about the transmission capacity. We need to think about how the system can operate with raising shares of renewables. So that's where it's not a question about state, but it's more about a state and central planning. A more holistic planning is needed in terms of infrastructure, in terms of flexibility solutions that are needed in advance to prepare the system with high shares of renewables. So I think I would stop with that and focus more insights in my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Gayatri, for pointing out important things like we need to. I mean, the additional points you suggested, which are useful, is the infrastructure need and more of sort of center-state coordination on these issues. So now I'll request Mr. Katyal for his remarks. Mr. Katyal?
Sir, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, very good evening to all of you. And just to introduce once again, I am Dr. Katyal, Deputy Director General at National Institute of Wind Energy. And per se, you know that National Institute of Wind Energy is one of the technical arms of the ministry. And I personally feel that even though we are a scientific institute and our role is to support the wind turbine players and the stakeholders, but I do feel in Tamil Nadu we can do extensive resource assessments, particularly with regard to the offshore technology, because the wind resource assessment we have already started up in Gujarat. We are now trying to move in Tamil Nadu, and if we are able to cover some 30 to 40 gigawatts for offshore, particularly covering the Dhanushkodi area, the Tuticorin, and the Kanyakumari area as well. So that will be a major, input for the state government of Tamil Nadu to go ahead and put the offshore turbines. So if we are able to do this 30 to 40 gigawatt in Tamil Nadu by 2-3 years, the measurement, and when I say measurement, it will include the wind resource, the oceanographic, the bathymetric, the geophysical, geotechnical, and even the environmental impact assessment studies, because that is very important if you have to bring the offshore projects in the state of Tamil Nadu. And the second, what I feel is the repowering, because Tamil Nadu is having 9,000 to 10,000 megawatt installed capacity onshore. And if you have to really go in for the higher numbers, you have to dismantle, uproot the lower size turbines, particularly which are available in the RLY Amoli districts and other places in Coimbatore, Tenkashi and all, so that we can come up with the latest 3.5 to 4 megawatt repowered machines. And that will in fact enhance the installed capacity in the state as well. But even though, I am not a part of the state government, but this is the two things which I feel can increase the renewable energy targets, particularly in the state of Tamil Nadu. But our role basically is to support the ministry in giving the technical inputs to the policy, as well as to support the industry. But if industries ask us support on offshore, we think that we are ready for development for offshore at any point in stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Katyal. So we'll get back to the to how offshore wind can contribute to the overall target at national level as well. We'll get back to later in the conversation. May I now request Netra to share her perspective?
Thanks, Ashwini, and thanks, Kajol, for that presentation. So, as we rightly know, everyone is aware that there is a huge potential of renewable integration in India, and very little of it is actually tapped. And given that 450 gigawatt of target by 2030, it is really important to see that how seamlessly we can integrate this RE along with the in the grid. So even with the current size of renewable on the grid, grid operators are already facing problem in managing the supply demand side. So balancing requirement for the grid is definitely needs to be taken care. SECI is coming up with lot of tenders, but it is difficult for them to find out the states who can purchase that renewable energy and sign that PPA with them. And why is it happening? Because the state discoms have that deviation settlement mechanism, and it is seen as a penalty. So instead of incentivizing this renewable energy purchase, which is as cheap as 2 rupees, they are little hesitant to sign those PPAs because they are not really aware, or that they are not really sure that how they are going to balance it along with their other PPAs. Now, energy storage is definitely going to play a very critical role in this integration. And Gayatri touched upon the infrastructure, so transmission infrastructure. So utilization factor of this transmission infrastructure is also needs to be considered with the renewable integration. So if you have solar of whatever 1 gigawatt capacity at one location, and if it needs to be transferred, then that much capacity, that transmission line which is to be laid, is going to have a very low utilization. So these hybrid technologies that you mentioned, I think that is also very important, that how solar, wind and storage being at one location as a hybrid project can increase that utilization of the transmission. And it was very interesting to see that TRL chart, where how at till certain level, academia and government can play the role. But beyond that, how industry and private sector and the deployment side has to pick up. So it is very interesting, and looking forward to more discussion later on. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Netra. So we'll get into more details about storage options. Now I'll request Will to share his remarks.
Thanks, Ashwini. And just to reintroduce myself, whilst at the moment I work full-time in the UK government, I'm also a visiting researcher at TERI there in Delhi, which is where most of my comments will be relevant from. So yeah, thanks again, Kajol, for the presentation. It was really, really useful. A couple of comments on my side from a general kind of innovation approach and kind of from an international perspective. I very much agree with the formulation around, the need for supply push policies as well as demand pull. I think we're very much organising activity ourselves in terms of identifying those R&D activities on the supply push side, which can really bring costs down, as they've done so successfully in the solar and wind areas. I think with support from DST in new areas like green hydrogen, as well as forums like Mission Innovation internationally, where India also plays an active role, I think we can really kind of accelerate the pace of cost reduction on that supply push angle. And then increasingly important nowadays will be that kind of complementary demand pull, which you spoke about. So that's very much about creating new markets for these technologies, either through things like standards policies or procurement policies, or I know, for example, in India, the Ministry of Power has announced kind of purchase obligations for things like green hydrogen in the refineries and fertilizer industries, which can really pull the technologies through and create a larger amount of deployment. And then just a couple of other quick comments. I think beyond these more kind of strict technology considerations around supply push and demand pull, I think when making the case for how important these technologies will be, I think there's a lot of work that kind of we within the climate community need to do to understand the jobs and growth impacts for these new technologies in different parts of the countries. Where will be better situated for things like electrolyzer factories or wind turbine factories, and kind of the economic benefits of those kind of things. I think on the other hand as well, I think it's important to recognise what the potential skills and knowledge gaps are within workforces around India, and how we can kind of upskill those workforces over the next decade to really take advantage. And I think that's both within the kind of the workforce, but also around kind of policymakers and supportive research institutions like our own, and kind of really understanding how we can bridge those gaps. So I think very much the supply pull, the demand push, and this more holistic approach to innovation and adoption of clean energy technologies can really accelerate towards that full 50 gigawatt target. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Well, that's a nice formulation to how to go, and we hope to explore also where we stand in terms of that arrangement and how we can activate both sides. I now request Sandhya for her remarks.
Thank you, Ashwini. And I echo Gayatri's and Mitra's points in terms of how important storage is in integrating high levels of renewable energy onto the grid. And it's extremely important to consider that these new technologies shouldn't be seen in isolation, but they should be seen more as a solution that can help in achieving these RE targets faster as well. So, for example, when we talk about building infrastructure on the transmission side, or building interconnectors for that matter, we are also talking about, on the other hand, the digitization, and then storage solutions and market mechanisms. So all these different solutions need to come together. And I would say that to give the remark that it's important to not look into this in a siloed manner, but look into it in a more holistic manner, and also use scientific frameworks to actually arrive at a more realistic integrated solution, because these are complex energy system problems.
Gayatri has kindly agreed to make a quick presentation on the global experience. I now request Gayatri to make that presentation, and request to stick to 7 to 8 minutes so that we can get into a conversation. Gayatri, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I would like to present on the key findings from IRENA's latest outlook, which is the World Energy Transitions Outlook, laying the pathway for 1.5 degrees Celsius, aligned with the Paris climate goals. So IRENA has been doing this study for last so many years, but this is the first time we have developed a pathway which is consistent with the 1.5 climate goals, limiting the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So I would like to have a quick, I'll go through the quick insights from the report, but I highly encourage you to go and check out the report, which is online and free to download. So maybe starting with how renewables are already cost competitive. So we do have a big costing database and we estimate the cost per year. And we see that over the last 10 years or the last decade, renewables costs have declined significantly, especially where we see for solar, we have seen the cost of electricity is reduced by more than 85% at a global level, and also followed by key technologies like CSP, offshore wind and onshore wind. So most of the renewable technologies are already cost competitive, which are well below the fossil fuel range, that they are ready for a rapid scale up of deployment. So in our outlook, we kind of laid out the pathways that the countries are planning, which is more likely to achieve even when those targets, for example, India achieves 450 gigawatts by 2030, what that really means in the global context. So if every country achieves in terms of their targets, we still will not be aligned with the climate goals. So we would have the emissions more or less at the similar level as of today. But in order to achieve the climate goals of well below 2 degree and towards 1.5 degrees Celsius, we do have to follow a different pathway that leads the energy system to be completely decarbonized by 2050, achieving net zero emissions. So this is the pathway that I would focus in my following slides. In the 1.5 scenario, we do identified some of the technological avenues that are needed to rapidly reduce the emissions. So here I tried to cluster them into 6 parts. So we think that energy electrification and energy efficiency driven by renewables, green hydrogen, and sustainable biomass would play a key role. So mitigating almost 90% of the needed emissions in 2050 in order to reach net zero emissions globally by 2050. So when I mean by renewables, this obviously means that we need to scale up renewables use, not just in the power sector, but also the direct use of renewables in the end use applications. Along with efficiency and other electrification measures, we see that overall renewable share in the energy matrix would rise to from 14% to almost 74% by 2050. So in terms of efficiency, as I said, various factors do contribute to efficiency improvements. So we have seen the efficiency in terms of shifting the technology from a conventional towards renewable-based systems, renewable-based power generation, for example, or electrifying the heat and transport applications, and also other aspects such as structural and behavioral changes could lead to higher efficiency improvements. And this is very crucial to keep the demand growth within the limits in order to achieve the scenario. So among different sources, we think electricity would play a key role in the future, occupying almost 50% of the final energy consumption mix. This means electrifying all the transport modes, electrifying the heat applications in buildings, and also electrifying some of the industrial processes. And this is one of the key pillar in order to drive the energy transition. And we think that such amount of electrified consumption would only be supplied by renewables in the power sector. So here we are not really talking about just substituting coal over um, renewables, but you're also thinking about supplying the increasing demand in the future with renewables. And so here we see that renewable share in the generation globally will reach 90% by 2050, of which wind and solar would lead the transformation with almost 63% of the generation. In terms of capacity, over 8,000 gigawatts of wind and over 14,000 gigawatts of solar PV would be installed by 2050. So these are the technologies that will play a key role, not just in power sector, as I mentioned, and would be essential in all the sectors to mitigate the emissions by 2050. And you can see the importance of technologies will vary across the sectors, but it's crucial that we deploy all the technologies in parallel in order to reach zero emissions across the sectors. So this means the fossil fuel would decline significantly in the future. And we have seen that already during the COVID phase, renewables have shown higher resilience and have proven to operate the systems with high shares of renewables in various countries, acting as benchmarks. So here we think that the fossil fuel would decline significantly in the future, with only natural gas occupying the largest share by 2050 and coal fully phased out by 2050, and which has a larger implication for a country like India. So this means we also need to invest. We need to increase the investment. So we think that under current plans, the countries are already prepared for investing around 98 trillion over the period of 2050. And we just need another 33 trillion. and a redirection of investments from fossil fuels and towards the clean energy technologies that we have been discussing to achieve the transformation that is needed. And such investments are beneficial because we say that if you think about or account for externalities, pollution, if for every dollar we invest, we are actually going to gain between $2 to $5.5. So that's the benefit that we are really talking about this transition. To summarize, the report also brings out the key policy changes or the framework that are needed to realize such a transformation. It's daunting, it's crucial that we start acting now if we want to achieve this goal. And we do have to have a stronger policy measures and stronger initiatives that has to be implemented and has to be started in place from right now. And 2030 targets are crucial in this phase. So there are some policies and there are some initiatives that I'm trying to show here, but in the limit of time, I would like to keep it short. But in case of India, I think India already has ambitious targets, but I think having targets not only in power sector, but also focusing more on the end use side and focusing more on decarbonization of some of the heavy industrial processes would play a key role in the context of climate achievement. So with this, I'll stop and I would hand over to you, Ashwini.
Thanks, Gayatri. This is pretty useful. And just to pick up 2 points from your presentation, as you rightly said, sort of all the new clean energy technologies, the cost competitive with fossil fuel and existing fossil fuel. So, despite that, I mean, at least in India and at Indian state level, not all the states are at par in terms of their ambition for clean energy addition. And the other thing which I wanted to point out is what you said, the global trend is much more optimistic in terms of reduction in fossil fuel capacity and usage. But when it comes to India, even though we have a very ambitious target of 450 gigawatt RE by 2030, that does not displace the fossil fuel. That rather keeps some space for fossil fuel. So we sort of have to discuss in that context. And the point Kajal mentioned in her presentation, how do we raise state level ambitions and how do we make states sort of change agent in this transition? So yeah, to start with, let's start with some specific question around technology. And hydrogen is sort of like has a new flavor in the policy space now, and the government has recently formed a committee, and there are new aspirations around it. Um, but it's a fairly new technology in Indian context as well. I mean, even though there's some industrial use, but scaling it up for non-industrial use and for long-haul transportation and other sort of issues, how do we how do we drive towards that? I mean, the current 450 gigawatt target doesn't include it. Can you suggest us, so what would be some priorities for India to mainstream hydrogen as part of India's energy transition,
Thank
and
you very much.
what role it can play in the current decade, particularly?
Thank you very much. I think that's a very interesting question, especially when we talk about hydrogen. Of course, we can talk about green hydrogen or blue hydrogen or gray hydrogen. But I think we as IRENA focus more on green hydrogen. And that's something that's being discussed and there are several projects that are being announced globally and a lot in Europe and also in some northern parts of the Europe. So I think green hydrogen is going to play a crucial role. And in our scenario, we do estimate hydrogen would occupy almost 12% of the final energy consumption, 2/3 of which will be green hydrogen and 1/3 would be blue hydrogen, which is natural gas coupled with CCS by 2050. I think in the Indian context, of course, hydrogen is something we call it as an indirect electrification because it's something that you are going to deploy in those applications where you cannot electrify directly. So the main idea is to electrify as much as possible, but some applications cannot be electrified directly. And that's where hydrogen plays a key role. For example, we do see a big potential of hydrogen in steel making, for instance. So India is the second largest producer of steel, and I personally see the big potential for using direct reduced iron with hydrogen, and that's one of the big applications that India could explore further, especially given the context that the demand for steel will be tripled in 2050 in India. And thinking about chemicals is also another application where we see the important aspect of hydrogen used as feedstocks and hydrogen used for the chemical production. And here we are not just talking about hydrogen, but we are also talking about hydrogen derivatives like ammonia and methanol, which could also be a solution in aviation and shipping sectors, mainly in shipping. And that's the sector that's really hard to decarbonize, and the solutions are really vague enough. And we do see a big potential for hydrogen. So I think in the Indian context, there is a huge potential to use hydrogen in industrial applications mainly. And also, I think hydrogen as a seasonal storage is also something that's being explored, but it's not something that would be prioritized in the coming decade, at least until 2030. So this is very crucial for instance, for Europe, for heating and other things, for using hydrogen as a seasonal storage, also as a flexibility solution. So this is something that could be explored. I'm not sure if it's something towards 2030, but definitely towards 2050 as something. So here, having a clear policy framework, encouraging our R&D, and also having some clear priority settings to use hydrogen, so those applications will really help.
Thank you, Gayatri. Will, I also want to hear your perspective on this. And recently, the minister sort of made a media statement saying that they're now going to include green hydrogen as part of RPO as well. There will be a purchase obligation for designated consumers. So, is that the right policy approach? And as one of the audience also asks, uh, how to what extent hydrogen could be a storage option for India's energy. Will, over to you.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
hydrogen as a storage is something I'm not yet sure whether it's something that will take place in the immediate term, as I already mentioned, but it's something that's crucial for countries where you lack other flexibility solutions, where you would need a seasonal storage. And here it again depends, as I think Will mentioned, that it all depends where you're going to produce this hydrogen. And if the hydrogen could be cost competitive when it's produced with least cost renewables. And that's a point that's being discussed at a global context about hydrogen trade. Where do we produce hydrogen, and where do we, sell those hydrogen, and in terms of infrastructure and other aspects. So I think the policy setting is quite something that needs to be further improved and further expanded globally, and the knowledge has to be shared to different countries. And IRENA has created a collaborative framework on this green hydrogen to share this knowledge, to share the latest experience and insights from member countries. So I think that's something that could be useful also for Indian context, to share those things. But I would not say this policy would be useful for this country or other country, because the technology itself is emerging, and this is something we have to see in the next 2 to 5 years how it works, because we have projects, but we need to see how the projects really work in terms of the policies and others. So I think that's something that would be very beneficial to expand at a global level, and also think more about hydrogen production. Where would the production sites be located? So looking into the hydrogen trade is also another aspect, not just for India, but for key economies, is
Sure.
something to be explored.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Will, over to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Ashwini, and thanks, Gayatri. That was very useful. I think just first to set out, I think a bit of context. I think globally, India is incredibly well placed to take advantage of green hydrogen. So I think the abundance of low cost renewables, the relatively high import costs of fossil fuels like natural gas and natural gas derived products like fertilizers, and also India is yet to build a lot of its energy infrastructure, and so it can build it with an optimized role for green gas in mind. So I think India, in positioning itself with other countries, I think it's in a very good position to really take advantage and kind of be a global leader. In terms of the kinds of policies and the kinds of things which can be useful to support, I think at TERI, the kinds of policies which we've really tried to push in our kind of make hydrogen in India type policy approach is really for India to be very proactive in indigenizing electrolyzer manufacture, which will be the key technology for green hydrogen. And so I was really glad to see the $10 billion investment from Reliance a couple of weeks back, which will include an electrolyzer factory, which is really massive. But I think to put that in context, we'll need to see many times that scale of investment in the years to come to supply the fertilizer, refinery, and steel industries as early lead markets. But I think that was really encouraging to see. I think also, Ashwini, as you mentioned, very encouraged to see that the purchase obligation commitments coming from the Ministry of Power. And I think it's really important that there's policies like that in place which can create the markets for green hydrogen in those early refineries and fertilizer industries. I think making sure that when those policies in place, they really can stay on top of and track the rate at which green hydrogen technologies are becoming available. So I think policymakers can often fall into the trap of kind of falling too far behind the rate of technology development. So it'll be important to kind of build in kind of enough flexibility within that policy to really keep ahead of the market. And I think whilst I think at an early stage, the steel sector was looking to be included within that, I think that's fallen away. But I think it's really important that as Gayatri mentioned, as India is looking to triple potentially its steel production, it's important that the new steel capacity which is going in today in the 2020s is future-proofed for a 2050 world. And whether that means building natural gas-based steel in DRI and then switching over to hydrogen, as is being trialled in parts of Europe at the moment, or kind of building in the requisite CCUS infrastructure, which in my opinion is slightly more uncertain. Then those are the kind of other sectors which would need to be brought into the fold, I think, to improve that. And then just very quickly on storage, I completely agree with Gayatri. I think we have a power sector section in our recent hydrogen report, which I'd encourage you all to take a look at. And the modelling that we undertook for that report showed that at the 450 gigawatt level in 2030, you probably don't need a huge amount of hydrogen on the system to balance, because at that stage, even though 450 gigawatts is an incredibly ambitious number, in reality, you still have quite a large amount of thermal capacity on the grid to provide the kind of longer term flexibility required. And I think in our analysis, we didn't see hydrogen coming online until the late 2030s, early 2040s, as that renewable penetration really increases kind of to 70, 80%. But yeah, that's my quick thoughts on hydrogen storage, but encourage you all to take a look at the report as a selfish plug. Thanks.
Thanks, Will. Now from hydrogen, we move on to the real storage options. And Netra, we want to hear from you. I mean, there has been, at least for last 2-3 years, there has been a policy emphasis on building in storage options, but despite the rhetoric at national level, it hasn't really trickled down to state level initiatives. So what are the barriers? I mean, we understand the cost is one of the factors, but even when solar and wind were expensive, there were few states, including Tamil Nadu, who pioneered in those technologies. So why let's start with why there is a sort of resistance or less interest in storage at state level for the time being? Or are we seeing really state level pioneers in terms of storage scale up?
Sure. So I would say why there is a resistance. See, right now, DISCOMs are looking at very huge scale renewable projects and signing PPA. They are signing PPA with 2 rupees per unit kind of energy. And then there is a false kind of a expectation happening with this DISCOMs that if energy is available at 2 rupees, why they would go for any additional component, because storage would definitely they have to understand that storage is going to help the smoothing of this renewable energy. They are going to get the more dispatchable energy which they can schedule and they can have that certain scheduling happening with that. And then storage can also help them integrate higher renewable energy, where this renewable energy can be shifted towards the other even evening peak hours. So that kind of understanding and awareness, I think it is not yet there. There is a false expectation that energy is available as such a cheap level. And then with that expectation, addition of storage is kind of a hurdle. But if you see the Andaman Nicobar Islands, so there they are adding almost 50 megawatt of solar, and the entire island is on diesel generation. And you know the latest project by NLC, where along with 20 megawatt solar, they have added 16 megawatt hour of battery energy storage for smoothing of that renewable and getting that dispatchable kind of, or having that smooth integration with the diesel generators. So such projects, such low hanging requirements are there at the island levels in India. And I think right now with some of the recent SECI's tenders for RTC power and peak renewable energy power, so storage is slowly getting inroads. But on the state level, I guess all these RE-rich states like Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, they have added a storage component in their roadmap, and it will happen soon. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's useful. As you rightly pointed out, this bundled approach for RTC kind of tenders is one way of pushing storage to state level as well. So, but at the same time, do we need something like RPO or some sort of mandate to mandated target for states? Will that help storage technologies? And yeah, I have a bunch of questions actually. Let me 2-3 questions. So that's one, what sort of policy instrument we need. The other thing is what we hear in terms of technology, storage technology. There's always often the conversation is largely around either battery storage or pumped hydro. So what are the comparative advantages of both, and should we prefer one or both of them are important technology options? And the third thing I wanted to ask you is India also has a strong domestic manufacturing aspiration around storage, as has been expressed in the last few months. So will India be able to, I mean, what I hear is we don't have the raw materials particularly. So given that, will India be able to emerge as a manufacturing hub for storage options? Those 3 questions for you.
Sure. So first question is about the policy level and whether RPO kind of structure would help. See, all these discoms, if you listen to these discom people speaking at the conferences, so you will understand that they definitely value the addition of storage on the infrastructure on various levels, on the transmission level, on the distribution level, distribution deferral advantages. So we all are aware that the demonstration project happened at the at Delhi at Rohini substation, that 10 megawatt hour battery by AES. What value it is adding? Okay. Now, with this kind of approach, along with that, there is another thing is DSM. So, a deviation settlement mechanism penalty. So, that penalty structure is there. Now, this penalty structure and value addition. So, these two things has to be seen in one frame. So, instead of saying that, I mean, installation of storage is just to remove those penalties or avoidance of those penalties, that is not the good way of looking at storage value addition. So I think kind of a storage purchase obligation, or if any discom is purchasing certain renewable energy, then there has to be maybe 20% or 25% out of that has to come from the storage. That kind of structure may help, but it is up to regulators and policymakers to do that kind of structure in the regulation. But just on the basis of that merit, that what all benefits energy storage can bring to the discom, on that basis as well, there should be projects happening on the discom level, state level. Your second question was about What was that? Sorry.
Between battery storage and pumped hydro.
Yeah. Battery storage and pumped hydro. So pumped hydro has been there for a long time. Many people do see
Sharing there, no?
value addition, and we also see the value addition that what pumped hydro can bring to the balancing of the grid. But we have to also understand that how much time does it take to create a new pumped hydro project. And there are a lot of environmental things that needs to be taken care, whereas the battery storage project can be built in within 6 months. So once you have the right sizing, right site location, and right technology partners, then such projects can be built in the 6 months. Now we are already behind the renewable targets, where we are saying that we should have 40 gigawatt of renewable within next 1 year. Now, to that kind of a speed, only energy storage or battery storage technologies can help the grid to integrate that energy in a faster way. Even the ramping benefit, so certain this advanced energy storage technologies, the benefits they bring with the instant ramping, which is required for the intermittent behavior of this renewable. So I think in that case, if we see the battery energy storage and hydro, both have their own spaces and requirements. At certain applications, battery energy storage would definitely be a much better option than the hydro storage. And the third question was about the manufacturing. Yes. As we all are aware that Niti Aayog has come up with the advanced chemistry cell manufacturing PLI scheme, and where we are looking at coming up with the 50 gigawatt hour of advanced chemistry cell battery manufacturing in India. And this program is very well thought and very well discussed within the policymakers and government. And while designing this project or designing this program itself, Niti Aayog has already talked with different supply chain participants in that category. So you said about there are no minerals or lithium is not available in India. But lithium may be just the 5% of overall supply chain in terms of that value. But there are a lot of other components, and that those can be manufactured in India. India can bring in lot of in-house value addition to this manufacturing, and lot of industry leaders. We also know the announcement by Reliance a couple of weeks back that they are also coming up with the Giga which will make these batteries. So there is a proper study done for the supply chain. We are very well positioned coming up with the 70 to 80 gigawatt hour of bids for this SEC manufacturing program. And IESA thinks that by 2025, we will definitely get into 50 gigawatt hour manufacturing. And as compared to the global level of SEC manufacturing, it is a very small scale. So if India has to play really an important role on the global scale, in fact, by 2030, we should have 500 gigawatt hour of SEC manufacturing. And that is the mission for ISA next. And that's why we are working with a lot of stakeholders and all the even supply chain component manufacturers for this whole ecosystem. So we are very confident that this is going to happen.
Thank you, thank you. And I do hope also battery sort of becomes, follows the solar sort of trajectory and becomes much more affordable and integrated into the grid. So now I move on to Dr. Katyal. So you pointed out in your initial remarks that offshore wind will be an important component of the 450 gigawatt target. So before that, I just wanted to share a thought that in the initial years of India's RE capacity addition, wind played a very strong role, but eventually solar has started dominating. So what are the scopes you do foresee for wind energy in next 1 decade and up to 2050 as well? And how big role will be played by offshore wind in India? And what is the current state of progress on that? Dr. Katyal?
Yes, I think now the focus of the government is on the offshore wind, because to add to the information of the forum, the Honorable Secretary of Ministry has formed a high level committee, because the first thing we are trying to come up for the offshore is to come up with the policy document, and there should be a strategy roadmap for the stakeholders and also for the wind turbine industry, because fraternity is looking to open up their manufacturing plants in the country, but they need to understand what is the volumes which are available into the Indian seas. So as all of you are aware that we have taken up two areas like Tamil Nadu coast and the Gujarat coast, but I think the Tamil Nadu coast will be almost equivalent to the European sea waters, where we feel that as per the International Electrotechnical Commission standards, the wind speeds on an average are between 9.5 to 10 meters per second on an average, which would mean that we are almost equivalent to European offshore sea conditions. So if we have to go in for Tamil Nadu, I think there can be a potential of about 50 to 60 gigawatt prima facie. But then what NIVE is trying to do is that we need to recheck this with a fresh long-term measurements. And for that purpose, we are planning to install 3 more LiDARs by end of October or November when in the coming year, because we wanted to do last December, January, because of the COVID, I think it was delayed. And hopefully once we do that, I think we will be able to cover the all three zones of Dhanushkodi, the Kanyakumari and the Tuticorin port as well. So with that, if we are able to do, I think that should be our first target. But when we come to the Gujarat, even though there is a target of 30-40 gigawatt in Gujarat, but in my opinion, Gujarat comes to the class 3 wind regimes as per international standards, because whatever measurement NIVE has recently done with the LiDAR based measurements, it is something between 7.7 to 7.75 meters per second on an average, which would mean that the plant load factors will be in the range of 40 to 42%, which is not very encouraging in the sense nowadays with the larger rotor dia wind turbines of 4 megawatt with 140 to 150 rotor dias blades, we are getting 32 to 35% on the land itself. So if we have to really focus on Gujarat, I think the manufacturing base by the manufacturing fraternity is very much essential. And if we have a big numbers of under 200 gigawatts into Indian seas, I'm sure the industry is equipped to put in their factory base, because already most of the players have their onshore factory bases, but then they will have to come up for the offshore machines, because they are specially designed for harsh sea conditions and as well as for salinity, etc. So for that purpose, what I feel is that Indian industry is well positioned to take up this challenge, but I think they are a little bit focusing on the favorable policy and also the favorable tariff mechanism together with the project certification which we are doing for RLMM, and that will boost the growth of offshore wind sector in the country. And I'm sure that out of this 450 gigawatt wind alone, we are planning to go with 150 gigawatt by 2030, even though it is an ambitious target, which would mean that wind alone from onshore, we can inject something about 30 to 35% of the RE target. And offshore to begin with, we can, out of 35%, we can put some 8 to 10% of offshore winds as well. So I think this is what is the, and the roadmap, what I was telling you, the last meeting is pending. I think next week or maybe in 10 days, the ministry will try to conclude the strategy roadmap. And that will be, placed in the public domain for the comments from all the academic institutes and also from the industries. Based on that, I think the ministry will try to finalize the offshore strategy. And that will be giving confidence to the various industries and stakeholders to go forward for offshore technology.
Thank you, Dr. Gottzel. I mean, as you rightly pointed out, manufacturing would be a key factor. In fact, in the early days, the domestic manufacturing of wind farms actually helped in many ways uh, domestic deployment as well. So we need to prioritize manufacturing to a certain extent as well. So now, Sandhya, coming to you, we sort of spoke about a range of technologies, but there is a compatibility opportunity. I would say it's not a constraint; it's rather an opportunity. So between solar and wind, they can sort of mitigate some level of variability, and storage further enhances that. So, and hydrogen also holds certain promises in terms of addressing seasonal variability. So right now, what is happening at central level, these technologies are promoted with siloed approach, as you pointed out in the beginning. So how do we bring them together? I mean, that's one part of issue. How do we sort of visualize, how do we plan for these technologies, clean energy technologies as a system approach? And then the other thing is, how do we bring down sort of that aspiration, which is at national level? How do we raise that at state level? I mean, probably Tamil Nadu is one of the front runner states, but there are several other states who are not as much serious about these technologies. Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that topic up, where it's important to. I mean, we understand that there are multiple technologies, and each of these technologies have their own benefits. So I think first and foremost would be to basically bring in these case studies for each of these technologies, and different types of methods. What are the ground realities while implementing these technologies or while installing these specific technologies? I think all this information should be imparted to utility level planners. What we felt from our interactions at the state level was that yes, there are companies, there are industries, there are these workshops where information is disseminated, but it's not in a continuous manner. So I think it's important to build capacity and bring that awareness amongst different stakeholders about the benefits that these different storage technologies bring. So even in energy storage, it's not just the battery storage, right? So we have the pumped hydro, we have the green hydrogen based technology, and where and even the applications are going to be different for each one of them. So it's not just about frequency regulation, it's not just about smoothing, but it's also about storing that excess capacity and maybe gaining revenue out of it. So I think it's important to also, when we talk about these technologies, it's also important to understand what challenges the states are facing through. And then the state's sector specific kind of policy frameworks would definitely help, as Mr. Katyal rightly pointed out, along with incentives. But beyond that, there are times when we have seen in these tenders that, we need to have a fine balance between the initial cost and the long-term durability. What happens is, sometimes we go for lower initial investment cost, but then in the long run, the strategy sometimes backfires. So I think it's important to partner with very reliable and established, manufacturers. And I think setting up these local manufacturing capacity and also building that skill right from the beginning, I think that would definitely give that confidence to utility level planners to engage in these new technologies and innovative methods, because this cannot be like a one-time demo project. This has to be a continuous engagement, knowledge transfer, making them confident that these solutions will be compatible with existing technologies. I think all those areas are extremely important to address when we are actually taking these solutions to the utility level planners. And I think from the policy level side also, I would say that the policy planners should also engage more with industries, because then they will be able to identify these gaps and then address it at the time. And it's not just after implementation or after demo projects, but it actually happens right at the inception stage. So to give you an example, in Tamil Nadu, for example, we have Renewable, development agency. Then there is a renewable energy management center which sits with the state road dispatch center. Then we have we have a utility level planning cell. Then we have so there are various entities at the transmission level, at the distribution level, and also nodal agency management center. I think at some point of time, all of them have to talk to each other, because if we really want these solutions to work out, then I think it's going to be a new system. It's going to be a big paradigm change. So that's why a system-based thinking, a system-based approach. And I think most of the studies have already started looking into that. For example, the NREL study that we looked into in the last webinar, they also spoke about the kind of modeling studies that can provide that kind of information. And there are several CSOs who have been working in this space. So bringing that system level approach, and one of the studies, in fact, we did in WRI along with Customized Energy Solution, was to identify what will be, how much battery storage can be integrated into the grid at the state level at that point of time. So I think similar studies would actually help us in doing that scenario level analysis, looking at low, medium, and high level RE pathways, and then integrate these technologies, at least at the scenario level, have that scientific framework, and then we look into it in a more, like I said, in a holistic fashion, because yes, we need to also understand the benefits of technologies, but also we need to see how that is having a higher level impact in the future, and how the states are going to manage that by building that level of infrastructure, how they can plan for job creation, how they can actually plan for manufacturing capabilities. So I think all these have to be looked together. And this is something that the states can start thinking of if they are looking for newer technologies. So I think, yeah, that's.
Thanks, Sandhya. I mean, as we're coming closer to the time, so what I hear from all the panelists is, the three levels where we need sort of coordination. One is at the technology level, one is at center state level, and then also in terms of players between private and public players, also we need a coordination. So I just wanted all the panelists to reflect as a last thought. What are the opportunities, and Sandhya sort of mentioned various platforms and various ways we can do, but what are the priorities to ensure this sort of coordination for faster uptake of clean energy technology? We have 5 minutes left, and I would request panelists to stick to 1 minute interjection on what they think are priority to ensure that the transition is well distributed between the states, and we sort of have consideration of all technology options, and there's adequate space for both public and private player actors. Mr. Katyal?
What I feel is that in India, actually, to be very honest and transparent, there should be a culture that the private companies, the state nodal agencies, the state utility boards, the ministry, and other scientific organizations, and also the NGOs should form a consortium of renewable energy, and all should work together with certain timelines and some certain fixed objectives, so that all thought should be pooled together, and we should work. Because what happens in India is government bodies are looking on the only, on a governmental angle, the private companies are only looking for their benefits of business volumes and models. The academic institutions are only looking for research and paper publications, and the other organizations are also focusing on the objective what for they are meant. But if you make a close consortium, I think renewable energy has a future in India, and even our honorable Prime Minister also wants to promote this, because he is giving a lot of funding for renewable energy at this moment also, even though he is cutting all the financial models for various ministries. So this kind of consortium and a WhatsApp group of 256 renowned people together will put their thoughts sitting on their own table and desktops, and then that way we can lead the country to the next level. And this is how the Europeans and other countries, they will work on that. So that culture needs to be brought in India if we have to move forward and see that all our targets and ambitious targets are being met with. So this is what I feel, but more on a administrative point of view. But then other panelists can speak on their, thought process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. Nitra?
Adding on to what Mr. Katyal said, so parallelly we can do all these groups and discussions and all the analysis and studies, but it is important to start implementing. It is important to have the deployment of the projects. So it is important to help financing entities understand how these projects are going to bring the value. There are many applications which are economically viable right now and bring payback within 5 years. But the mindset of many of the decision makers are payback has to be within 3 years. So that awareness has to be created, that confidence has to be built. And funding which is going towards R&D that can be also utilized for certain deployments. And for the deployment as well, we have to find out the right site for the deployment or right project for the deployment. Many discoms are happy to have their just demonstration projects, which is free of cost for them. But we have to, I mean, any company or any project, they have to find out the right site for this, even the demonstration deployment. And as WRI is working with a lot of central state level agencies, nodal agencies, I mean, we will continue to support such studies, analysis, discussions, and all the creating the environment or support. But it is very, very crucial now to have the actual projects on ground, because it is not just the deployment. There is a lot of downstream activities that needs to be done. Skill set has to be created. There will be installation learnings. There will be operational learning. So everything is there. So we have to start.
Thanks, Nitra. Gayatri?
Yes, I think I will try to summarize in a minute or so. I think I'm just going to mention some keywords. Here we need more integrated energy system planning involving all the stakeholders vertically and horizontally. That's the key thing going forward. And also we need a kind of holistic policy framework, not just focusing on one sector, one technology, but considering the portfolio of technology and the entire energy system or the sectors. And I think it's also important not just announcing targets, but turning those targets into actions. So I think that's very crucial. And India's very well known for ambitious targets, but I also think that these targets should be achievable. And in order to be achievable, we need to remove all the barriers that are in place for existing technologies like wind and solar, and also to create a pipeline of projects to create a kind of demand, a stable demand for the technology. And I also think most important aspect is stop building new coal plants. I think that's very, very important, because the investment decision we make now is the decision we make for 30 years. So I think it's important we stop when we know that we are not prioritizing the technology. We need to stop it, and we need to focus entirely on those technologies that needs to be prioritized. And last, I also want to mention the R&D and the standardization, which I think Will already mentioned, the need for standards, the need for the basic standards that we need to place, may it be in technology, or it could also be the efficiency, which is quite lagging in India. So energy efficiency is also another important thing for a fast growing economy. So we should ensure those standards are in place, at least for the new construction and also for the new industrial processes. Thank you.
Thanks, Gayatri. Sandhya?
Thanks, Ashwini. So we started with the 20 gigawatt, solar by 2020. Then we went to 175 gigawatt by 2022, which was primarily focusing on solar and wind. And now we have the 450 gigawatt by 2030. So, I mean, it's time for us to think differently. And when we say differently, we have to think holistically. And as Mr. Katyal rightly pointed out, we need to bring private sector, academic institutions, research organizations, government together. And I also agree with Netra in terms of we know, why this is happening. Why do we need RE? We know, what technologies should be in place. We just need to somehow try and figure out how we can do this, how we can implement this. And integrated energy planning at the state level becomes extremely crucial for that. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sandhya. Kajal, you have any last remarks? Kajal?
No, thanks, Ashwini. I think there were some really good points that were being discussed over the overall panel discussions. And we do see, like, when we are looking at the national level, we do need to look at how the state will play a major role in transferring all these targets and all these technologies adoption. And I may be repeating the points which have already been covered. The supporting for the definite infrastructure development and supporting systems, the essential key, and not to forget that apart from looking at the major technologies, when we see the renewable technologies, the supporting technologies is also definitely crucial when we see for the overall pathway to move for the 450 gigawatts.
Thank you, thank you. So we're just 2 minutes over the time, so I won't take any time. Thank you very much for the insightful discussion, and this is really really rich conversation. We have to take it forward, and this energy transition is going to be dynamic in terms of technology. So probably 10 years back we didn't have idea, 10-15 years back we didn't have any idea that we'll be talking about all these technologies we are talking at present. So going forward, we may have further breakthrough in technology as well. So this is an ongoing conversation, but we need to get the process right. How do we build this together, and how do we create actors and sort of process around these technologies? That's also equally crucial. So I'll stop here. Thank you all for your insights, and thanks the audience for joining the discussion. And the next conversation is on July 20th, where we'll be talking about institutional pathways uh, towards 450 gigawatt. And thank you for the day, for today. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Katia, for taking up the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.